I'm very flexible the direction to go here, but I think that, I think it's a very appropriate topic because we're about to get into a situation where, I mean, this can apply to sports, this can apply to politics. We're about to go through a presidential election. We're talking about leader of the free world. We're talking about, leaders of different franchises for your favorite sports teams. We're talking about leadership of companies for your favorite companies to invest in. We're talking about leadership, I think, all the way down to, AI leadership, nonprofit leadership, just entrepreneurial leadership, everything. I think that this is I mean, they've written books on this, they give courses on this. This is an absolute massive freaking topic, of course. And
you can get a degree on this.
You can get a degree on this, yes. And I mean, we've both had enough experience in our lifetimes to, I mean, I've run multiple public companies. I think that, I mean, I got my own style. I'm not, in the words of one CEO, I think when we were acquired by TD Ameritrade, I think Fred Tomczak, who was the CEO, I said to him once, I go, you think I'm ever going to be the CEO here? And he goes, he goes, honestly, Tom, I don't even think hell freezing over will make you the CEO.
So I've been reflecting on this, can I tell an anecdote? This is a Wall Street anecdote.
Sure.
Where it was at one of the big banks. I don't know if it was Morgan Stanley or it was either some Morgan or one of the but big. And we're on the trading floor when trading floors were a thing, even on Wall Street. So sometime probably in the late 90s. And I was with the boss. I was with the leader of the floor, like whoever the head of that trading desk was. And I was probably 26 or 7, a reporter at Bloomberg, and he was explaining to me that having his job, being the leader of the trading floor, whatever that meant in that context of that trading floor. And he kept using it, the metaphor of having that chair. He kept pointing to his chair on the desk. He'd say, that chair, he's like, the hard thing about my job is getting that chair. Everybody wants to have that chair. Staying in that chair and being in that chair is relatively easy. And the skills that it takes to be in that chair are very different than the skills that it takes to get into that chair. And obviously what he was getting at is the skills to become the CEO or the skills to become the team manager, the manager of the best sports, and pick all the things. But that the attributes and skills to become president, to become whatever the thing is, the things that make you good at acquiring power, make it real simple, are very different than the skills that make you good at exercising power or managing and leading once you have power. And that his perspective was that the biggest challenge with the world in general, whether it was in sports, whether it was in finance, whether it was in any domain of power, is that the skills that are the most effective at acquiring power, or the most successful to acquire power, frequently have a low correlation with the skills that are associated with administering power.
Yeah,
and I'm interested in whether you agree with that.
I think that's pretty fair. I'm going to tell a slightly different story because I think it's fun, but I was doing a panel. I wasn't negotiating. I was doing a panel once, and I was the moderator on the panel, and it was an entrepreneurship panel, and I was the entrepreneur, and there was 3 private equity funds that were on the panel. It was for some, big event. And I asked a question, and essentially, something similar, like, what are you looking for in a CEO in order to invest in a company? Invest in their company. And I think the chair that you just brought up is interesting because the first person, which was a huge private equity fund, like $5 or $7 billion or something, looked at me and said, I'm looking for somebody who's willing to die in that chair.
Which is different than for someone that's willing to die.
No, I understand. I understand. So which leads me, they said, and he repeated it. He said, we're looking for people that are willing to die in that chair, meaning you're going to basically work yourself.
What did that mean? What did that mean to you when he
said that?
That
means they were looking for people that are going to work themselves, that will kill to be successful, that work themselves to death, that aren't afraid.
Will dedicate their lives to that chair.
That's right. Now, which brings me to the next point, which is my own personal story. So when I talk to private equity firms, one of the reasons we've been able to build a couple of successful companies that we've taken public is because people in the private equity world go, I will kill to invest in you, meaning they want to invest in me. So we'll kill to invest in you. Like you are exactly what we're looking for because you are one of those people that will do whatever it takes to be successful. And that's what we want to invest in. Yet when I get to a bigger company like TD Ameritrade or somebody else, that somebody that buys us out, I say, I would like to be the CEO. And they say, we'd rather hire dirt. Like I'm the last person they ever want to be sitting in that chair. So what I find so interesting is, and it doesn't, honestly, that doesn't bother me because I almost feel like, I don't want to be the CEO of a company that doesn't really respect what I do. But
Of course.
but I think it's so interesting the different mentality and how different the objective is from an investor who's looking for who's looking for a visionary or somebody to build a company, to somebody who's looking to a company that's looking, or to a board that's looking for somebody to manage that company and not
Exactly.
embarrass, and do whatever. And so I mean, essentially,
they're different jobs. They're completely different jobs.
which is
It
exactly
require
why,
totally different human beings.
right, which is exactly why the Apple board fired Steve Jobs, when they did.
Yeah.
It's exactly why the Tesla board, really wanted to fire, Elon Musk. It's exactly why recently, OpenAI, wanted to change leadership.
It's why Carl Icahn goes crazy with wanting to fire CEOs of public companies that he feels that are busy, managing as opposed to leading or growing, or they're not visionaries, right?
Of course. Of course. I mean, and I've been around leaders like that, and I'm not for one second going to say that they're bad at what they do. People that are like professional managers that are really good at, hurting, and they're really good at letting people, like empowering people and really allowing, their smartest people to make decisions and allowing the business to grow. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, that's a whole different mentality. That's a whole different type of person. And I never fit that mold. That's why I always end up, doing something on my own. But I think it's interesting when we talk about like the concept of, managers. So I guess my point is, what am I looking for? And what I'm looking for might be different from what you're looking for, or might be different from what an investor is looking for, or an employee is looking for. I know
But
there are a
also,
lot
I
of,
would even say the life cycle of the organization itself, the type of manager for a currently prosperous, well-established organization is very different than the type of manager for a floundering organization that needs a shake up and a turnaround. I mean, I'm not going to describe to you all the organizations here.
Yeah, of course.
But my point is that I think that the question itself, what makes a good manager? Well, it depends on what you're trying to manage, right? You end up in a non-answer to that question.
Yeah, but I think there's another level here which we can get around. There's a couple of things that good managers all have in common, whether their job is to present a vision, to execute on a game plan, or whether their job is to manage. I think that there's a lot of characteristics that everybody kind of has in common. And one of them, there's obviously a leader. I've been around CEOs that are incapable of leading. And that is simply the most dangerous situation to be in. CEOs, you have to assume at a certain level, everybody's smart. So it's not a question, like, we don't run into situations where you have a dumbass CEO. It's very rare, especially a hired gun, incredibly rare. But you do run into situations where you have CEOs that A, are not leaders. And then B, you run into situations where you have CEOs that are not necessarily procrastinators, but that can't really make decisions. And to me, that is the most dangerous combination. Sometimes you get poor CEOs and poor managers because they're just not good decision makers. And other times you get bad people because they're not good leaders. And if they have both of those qualities, you're dead.
So you needed somebody who makes decisions in a manager, full stop.
Yeah, right or wrong, you need decision makers. And I mean there's a lot of obvious stuff that goes with that. Like, you can't handle, any kind of person with a lot of insecurity, any kind of person that's I guess basically, somebody with a lot of insecurity is on top of that is really the most dangerous.
And at the same time, and this would be a Carl Icahn quote, so take it or leave it, the skills that help you become the CEO, it's the fact that you haven't made any decisions, that especially in a large organization, it's frequently those who have done the best job of not getting fired. They've stuck around the longest. They've managed to avoid getting blamed for failures. They've managed to avoid offending anybody. They've managed to take credit for things, whether they were responsible for them or not. And their primary skill is evading responsibility and assuming credit and not offending people and getting along with people.
Well, those people aren't supposed to last anyway. I mean, they shouldn't be around.
But I'm saying those people last the longest in many large, especially large, like a Coca-Cola, an IBM, and a Dow 30 component. It's the person who, those are the people that survive the best, and they end up in the CEO chair. I mean, those are the people Carl Icahn goes after. He's like, the reason you're putting people in these CEO jobs, because they're the thing that got them in the job was they were the last one there that didn't offend anybody and never got anybody irritated. And so because they were basically the least offensive and most agreeable person and ultimately least decisive, they end up in the CEO chair, which requires the most decisive person.
I know, but don't you think that that's more of an old school thing? And in 2024, even old school boards don't have tolerance for that. I mean, what drives me crazy about boards, and when it comes to decision making with respect to executives, and it doesn't just have to be the CEO, it's any executive, is the only time they're decisive now is when it's a ethical issue. And I think that that's not the only reason to be decisive. I mean, you're messing around with somebody, at work. You're doing, you're an alcoholic. You're whatever. You're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Those are easy decisions. Anybody can make them. That's a brain dead decision. The hardest thing to do is to make a change when the person who's in the role is absolutely perfect, except they don't get anything done. That is the most difficult situation.
I would say that and to deploy new resources into new markets.
Yeah, well, whatever. They can't.
More than just a personnel decision. It's a capital decision into either a new market or a new product category. I would say those are the sorts of decisive things that someone like Elon Musk gets incredible credit for. You've proven very skilled at sort of assuming risk in new markets and new products. It doesn't always work for you or him for that matter. But I'm saying those are the more challenging CEO domains.
Yeah, I mean, in the role I'm currently in, it took a long time to make a CEO change, and I fought really hard for it, and it was almost a 2-year process, and it's like, you think to yourself, this shouldn't be that hard. This is an obvious situation. And I just feel like, I just feel like I've been down that path before. And there's just, we have to recognize where we are. And I think that happens in a lot of places. That happens in sports because ownership gets attached to or way too loyal. And it's not a personal thing. It really isn't. It's business. And I hate to, it sounds so crass, but that's what it is.
There's a bigger question, which I think is the part of relevant to why this has even came up as a topic, because there's the discussion of what makes a good leader, what makes a good manager. And then I would say there's 2 additional questions that occur to me. One, are we getting better at selecting leadership as a culture, or are we getting worse? Obviously, for example, I believe politically, our political system is getting increasingly bad at selecting leadership, not increasingly good. We'll talk about that another day. But you could say the same thing for sports team managers or company managers. Are we getting better or worse? And that's the first thing. And the second thing, the question that occurs just on the topic of leadership is, to what degree could the biggest problems of the world or of our country be better resolved if we had better leadership? How responsible is current leadership for the current state of the world? So 2 questions. Are we getting better or worse at selecting leaders as a culture? And how much of the current state of the world could be improved if we improved our leaders?
I do not believe that there's a single person alive there's a single person breathing that thinks that in either party we're going to the November election with the two best choices in a two-party system, I can't imagine there's a single person in America that thinks Donald Trump or Kamala Harris are the two best candidates to be leader of the free world. I can't accept the fact that there's a single person in America that thinks either of those two are the best that we have.
For sure, but the question is, do people believe that the general system for selecting leadership is degrading or improving or staying the same?
No, it can't degrade, and it can't necessarily improve. What it is it's cyclical, and you go through various cycles where the choices are super bad, they're poor, and that leads to super good choices coming up in the future. So what happens is, the system is not broken. People complain about a two-party system, whatever. The system's not broken. The candidates are cyclical. And what happens is you go from really bad candidates, to really good candidates. And I think in 2028, you'll end up with two really good candidates.
But would you more broadly in the American culture, if you look at the culture of executive leadership in the private sector, or the culture of sports coaches and managers, sports leadership, do you believe that the same cyclical dynamics apply there, where there's
I think you're seeing it. I think you're seeing it happen in real time. I absolutely do. If you look at sports right now, you're seeing the youngest head coaches and managers that we've ever seen in the history of professional sports. Because what's happened is there's been this, this is why the Bill Belichick's of the world can't get a job, and why, they'd rather hire some 34-year-old kid off the sidelines of some successful college program. Right now, we've entered into an era where that is exactly what's happened. We've gone from, these old famous kind of coaching names to these young no-name kids who are, changing the sport. That's why in business now, you are finding the very non-traditional CEOs that start off when they're very young, and, they're either founder CEOs. They're not from the same school. These are not, we're not dealing right now with like Princeton grads and Wharton grads. We're dealing with dropouts and entrepreneurs moving into that role. The CEO scene for successful companies, especially if you want to talk about technology companies, is very young. And
no, but I think I'm more interested. I don't disagree. I disagree a little bit. I don't know if I want to say I disagree yet. I'm more interested in the less obvious leadership, the banking sector leadership,
right? And I think that's a different.
Obviously, the tech companies. Come on, that's.
But I don't think that's. I don't think that's a fair argument. You can't. I don't think you can ask. I think if, just as an example, if the CEO of Charles Schwab just stepped down after 15, 20 years. The next person in line, they've been grooming him for 30 years. That is what I would expect Charles Schwab to do. But that is not what any of the firms in finance that have vision would ever do. So I do not think that. So I think that is not the test case anymore. That is kind of an outlier, that you go with somebody that's been there for 25 years, as opposed to going with somebody that, you're going to bring in somebody, or you're going to bring up somebody that's young, fresh, new, that kind of thing.
Which one do you believe is the exception now, the kid or the groomed?
The groomed
is the exception now, you think?
Yes, I do believe the groomed success.
I wonder if that's really true.
You don't think that's true?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I just went through the process.
I'd like to think that's true, but I'm not sure.
I just went through the process with our own company and the selection process, and so I'm not saying I'm not an expert on it, but that's just the way I feel like is the trend, is that we're not reaching down into lifers anymore, and we're looking outside for just a different type of talent.
And is that an indictment of what does that say about the system, that the system is not breeding leadership, that they're looking for unconventional locations for new leadership?
I don't think that that's an indictment of the system at all. I think that's actually a good thing. What they're saying is, here, I'll give you an example in the trading world. As trading firms became much more sophisticated with respect to the technology that they use, all the high frequency firms in Chicago, when they would go out and they would hire new people, they weren't interested in traders with any experience. They wanted young kids with technology experience that were crazy smart. They didn't want anybody with trading experience because they didn't want people that had opinions on the market direction, all these things. I think that's really important in a manager's role and a CEO's role. I don't necessarily want people that have experience in exactly what we're doing. I want people that come in fresh, that can look at things objectively. And I mean, I think some of the best people that we've hired over the last 10 years have been from outside the industry. It depends what the role is. But I mean, I'm not going to hire somebody for a trade desk role that knows nothing about trading. But for other positions, whether it be devs or researchers or stuff like that, I'm not so much interested in the trading side anymore.
Would the problems of the world be solved if leadership was? How many of the problems of the world, whether they're inside of companies or inside of countries or inside of sports organizations, are a result of leadership? How important is leadership to reality?
I think it's huge. I think it's huge. It is very difficult. And this is, I think, something that's missed quite often. It is incredibly rare. You almost never see a successful startup, a successful business that you can't at least recognize who the leader was or point to somebody. You need some kind of a monster at the head. Like you need something. They're ultimately as flat as you want to think your company is. And we've always really prided ourselves on the fact that we're taking great pride in the fact that we are a super flat company. And yet in the end, there needs to be somebody that can, if everything's a tie, that has a tiebreaker.
What is the biggest problem right now, and how could a change in leadership change it? What is the world's biggest challenge today, and how would new leadership change that challenge?
Well, you're going to hate.
Or what is one of the world's largest challenges? It's kind of an absurd question, so
it's not that absurd, because my answer is going to be an answer that I never would have given you 5 years or 10 years or 15 years ago. But it's an answer I'm going to give you in 2024. The biggest challenge is workplace efficiency. We have become incredibly complacent as a workforce, somewhat. I hate to use the term lazy because I don't think people are inherently lazy, but I think people have different ideas of what work is now. And so we've become less efficient. The 40-hour work week is now 30 to 35 hours. And the 5-day grind is now 3 days. And people have the same expectations for reward, but they are not committing the same amount of resources and capital to the roles.
To the organizations.
That's right.
So you'd say the biggest can leadership change that? Is that the fault of leadership? Is leadership responsible for that inefficiency? And could a change in leadership resolve that?
I believe that the answer is yes. I believe there are certain leaders that could change the way everybody does business. I believe there are current leaders out there, like an example might be like a Jamie Dimon type person, where he's literally too big to fail. And he could say, I want everybody back, 5 days a week. And there are certain companies, I remember, and trust me, I'm not a fan, so I'm not saying this as a fanboy, but I remember years ago, like back in the 90s, I remember somebody quoting Stevie Cohn, and he said in his trading room, he liked to keep the temperature at around 60 degrees. 58, 62, something super cold, so everybody stayed sharp. And somebody complained that it's ridiculous. It's freezing here. I'm in a winter jacket in the office. And he said, go find another job that pays you, $500,000 a year. That's your choice. Yeah.
Right. With a 9-figure bonus.
Yeah, of course. Year. Yeah. Hey, if you don't like it, go find something else. I mean, that's, I feel like you have to start with those companies that, and I think everybody's a little nervous because, they don't want to lose people, but at the same time, the system has to change. There's no way to maintain the current level of where the stock market's trading with an efficiency that's, 30% degraded from from where it should be to reach these numbers. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's not a U.S. problem; it's a global problem. We have the same problem, even to a larger extent, in cities like London, where it's hard to commute. Other cities around the world where it's expensive to live in the city, where it's hard to commute, childcare. There's all these different things. But the reality is, workplace efficiency has dropped off so much that it's very hard to maintain, certain levels of performance. And I think that's the biggest problem we face. Like, we don't face a shortage of smart people, and we don't face a shortage of smart ideas, and we don't face a shortage of good leaders. Okay, but what we do face is we run out of resources now. My number one thing is, hey Tom, we don't have the resources to get this done. We don't have enough developers. We don't have enough researchers. We don't have enough people. Blah blah blah.
That's the voice of the Lord God himself. Who is this?
You guys okay?
We were doing better until the voice of God started breaking our I think that was more of a question for you, Tom. I'll be honest. I have an answer, but I
thought I was answering. I didn't state that question the same way, but I thought I was answering it. I said 5 or 10 years ago, asking people to work wasn't an issue. I think
but the rebuttal would be your definition of what work is. To play the other side on this. When you say asking people to work wasn't an issue, it implies that people are not working right now.
I didn't say people are not working. What I said was that we are not working to the same extent, and as such, every single firm that I've talked to, and I meet with a lot of different firms, and every firm has the same issue. It's all about productivity, and it's all about, the efficiency and getting what they can out of people. And everybody is getting less efficiency, less productivity, and nobody really has an answer for it, because you're going to need a couple of the firms that where people can't afford. That goes back to my Stevie Cohen example, where you're not going to quit if you turn down the air conditioning, and that's where we're at right now. And, some firms, I've heard some firms in the financial space say, please, somebody go to 5 days a week so we can go to 5 days a week. And that is almost universal across, different CEOs and managers and stuff like that, because that's the way everybody feels on a management level. Now, that gets away a little bit from our discussion on what makes a good manager, but the reality of this is, if you want to be a good manager, you've got to get people to deliver to whatever your expectations are. Otherwise, you got to change people. In
order to get people to do that, but I would say that's which goes to the original question, which is what makes a good leader. And a good leader is someone, yes, that gets the people that are being led to perform at their greatest potential around a shared vision or a shared goal. And so then the question is, well, what is the best way to accomplish that? And my answer, having been a global managing editor, running a large piece of the Bloomberg organization for a number of years, and then large pieces of the NBC organization for a number of years, and then having been the CEO of a medical device company for a year and a half. And I think anybody would agree with this. It's easier said than done. Is you need to enroll people. That people can't be managed through. Let me put it this way. I guess if you're Stevie Cohen and you're paying people $500,000 a year with the option to make $50 million bonuses, you can lead through intimidation and threat. But the most effective leadership is better done not through intimidation and threats, but by enrolling people in a shared vision where they buy into what it is that you're trying to accomplish and want to be part of it.
This has nothing to do with threats. This has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that at all. This is a reasonable expectation that that you're going to get a certain amount of time and effort and production. It's a reasonable expectation. You pay somebody to play baseball for you, and they need to do more than just. There are a few players you can get away with that can just hit, but not everybody is Shohei. You can get away with a few players that can just field, but not really. What ultimately you need is people that can do everything. Otherwise, they move on. And I think that goes for any sport. And I think that to a certain extent, You need people in business and you need people to build companies that are capable of giving you, what you expect from them. Otherwise, as a good manager, you have to make
A good leader will be able to, a change in leadership can improve our workplace efficiency.
I believe that is the case.
I mean, that's the bottom line, is that leadership is actually the most important thing in the world.
Yeah, why does a team with a crappy record change the manager and all of a sudden they have a great record sometimes? And the answer is it's leadership. Why does a company, why does one person turn around a company like IBM or Microsoft and three people before that couldn't? It's not, that person's not capable of doing it. It's not all just vision. There's a leadership role that's embedded in there. There's a leadership aspect to that turnaround and to that success. And I think we have to recognize that.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. I also think that the system of identifying leaders is much more efficient in the private sector and in the sports world. That the pool of avail, like if I'm looking to hire a coach or a manager, or I'm looking to promote an executive, that my menu of choices is much broader, and that the nature and characteristics of those choices is much more interesting, and that the process of filtering those candidates is much better, especially when compared to the political system. That the system of filtering for leadership in politics, is the opposite of the system for filtering for leadership in the private sector or in sports, which is why I actually believe leadership in both sports and the private sector is vastly superior. I mean, I think everybody would agree that leadership in the private sector and sports is vastly superior to the pool of leadership in politics.
Except that I think that the pool of leadership in politics is going to change dramatically after the 2024 election. This will be the last time that you see a situation like what we have this year. I mean, the Donald Trumps of the world will no longer exist. That will not be, that type of person, that personality, they will not be in politics anymore. That when I'm talking about, that won't happen around the globe. Those are not your choices. You're not going to end up with 78-year-old, with 78-year-olds or 82-year-olds. It's not going to happen. So that's the change. I'm not picking on him, for who he is. I'm just saying that from an age side, from just where he is in life,
yeah. I mean, the reason I disagree with you is just because at any age, the quality of political leadership is still garbage, in my opinion. That there's a bigger issue with political leadership than how old these people are.
Yeah, but of course. But in order to, again, I believe a lot of that is cyclical, and I believe a lot of that will change.
From your mouth to God's ears, as they say, we shall see.